like the language, and then the money thing crept up really quickly. Because when you go to au pair, and also when you move abroad when you're on the younger side, especially, like I just had some savings from all my random jobs, and I also was not doing any sort of like financial planning or budgeting beyond like, can I afford to do like this right now and maybe like take a trip in a few months or something like that. So the financial thing was really kind of took me by surprise. After my year in Paris, our Thibaut and I were doing really well, like on our relationship. So it was decided that I would move to Strasbourg and we would move in together and, you know, kind of take that next step. And my brain just like hadn't fully registered how difficult it would be to try to stay in France and try to find a job.
Welcome to International Love Story, the podcast about intercultural relationships. In today's podcast episode, I'm going to welcome Claire. Claire is originally from the United States, but she's living in France right now, and she's going to share not only her love story, but also how she went from an au pair in France to being a freelancer with a very solid income in a couple of years. Her journey, especially her professional journey, I wouldn't say it's very straightforward. So how she would describe it is that it was just a lucky accident, but this is a story she can tell much, much better than I could possibly do. One of the bigger topics we're going to talk about in this episode is the topic of money, because and speaking out of my experience, when I moved the first time in 2017 to Miami, I had some savings and I brought everything I had saving-wise with me. And after approximately 4 months, I ran out of money. And this is when I had to depend on Nacho fully. And knowing what I know nowadays, I would have done a couple of things differently, especially the topic of money would have been a topic I would have thought through a little bit better. In our case, nowadays, everything is good, all went well, but having the feeling of relying on your partner solely financially is definitely a big, big burden. And again, this is going to be part of today's podcast episode as well. With this being said, let's give a warm welcome to Claire. Claire, go ahead, introduce yourself. Who are you? What are you doing? Tell us all about you.
Hi, Tina. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm originally from the Chicagoland area in the U.S., which is in the state of Illinois, in the middle of the country. You know, that middle part everybody flies over when they're visiting the West Coast or the East Coast. And I moved to France in 2018. I started in Paris, and then actually since 2019, most of my time has been in Strasbourg, France, which is about 2 hours by train east of Paris. And then I also spent a little bit of time in Montpellier as well. But by and large, most of my expat journey, as it were, has been in Strasbourg.
And going from there, I mean, there's a reason why you ended up a little bit longer than expected in France. This is also what we're going to talk about in today's podcast episode. So you moved to France permanently, living in France since 2018, in Strasbourg at the moment to be precise. And I'm wondering if it was always your plan to live abroad for so many years.
It's like you know the answer. No, so it was not a plan to move abroad, I should say, in terms of it being a long-term thing. So when I originally moved to Paris in 2018, it was to be an au pair, and I didn't really have it planned out beyond that year. So when I did that move, I was 24. And at the time, I knew a very cute boy who I had met on previous travels outside of France, but he is French. So he was starting a master's degree in Strasbourg, and we were still in contact on WhatsApp. And I was just living at home, working so many odd jobs. Like I was working at the the wedding bridal store, David's Bridal, which any American listeners you have might recognize, helping women pick up their wedding dresses. And then I had about 2 nanny jobs and an internship in digital marketing, and just was very enmeshed in that like early 20s phase of trying to figure out what I wanted to do and trying to figure out why adulthood didn't feel as exciting as I thought it would. And so, yeah, and staying in touch with Thibaut and kind of not really knowing what I wanted my US journey to look like, I decided to kind of take a break and go to Paris to au pair. And because it is so close to Strasbourg in France, it's about 2 hours by train, like I said, or you can take a bus, which is a little bit longer, but still very accessible. When I arrived in Paris, we quite quickly started to date, where he would just visit me and I would visit him, and we would see each other maybe 2 times a month. And we had a lot of flexibility too, because with the au pair schedule and him being a master's student, you know, we could take advantage of a lot of the cheapest travel options to go and see each other.
Just so interesting that when going abroad that you, I mean, in your young age, in the 20s, and I'm sure everyone who's listening and watching right now can relate to this. So if you're in your 20s, or like I am in my 30s, but you bring yourself back to a situation in your life where you were just like, okay, now I have to grow up. I have to figure it out. I have to have the answers to all my questions. And then later on, at least out of my experience, you realize, oh, well, I still don't have the answers. I'm still figuring out life. Yeah, the moment I just roll. And yeah, so I can imagine that in that moment, in that stage of your life, there were like a lot of new circumstances you adjusted to, a lot of questions to answer. Everything was excited. You were in this completely different culture, different language, and then you started dating. You were just like living life and trying to figure it out. So wondering, comparing the life you're at right now. So and we had this little pre-session beforehand, so I know being quite clear in what you want, where you're at nowadays, to the woman back then in 2018 who had all this question, who tried to figure it out. What advice would there be for everyone who's watching or listening right now? And also, what advice would you like to share to your younger self?
I feel this probably comes up like a lot, so it's not super original, but just like the idea of being really kind to yourself and giving yourself a lot of grace, because it's not meant to be easy. And I think there's this conflation between the idea that your 20s are supposed to be fun, and by extension, that makes people think that maybe they should be easy. And I fully agree. It's a decade to have fun and to explore and to experiment and to do crazy things like move to Paris because you can, or to travel around South America and backpack and meet cute, international boys. Do all of the things. But I think that, there is like this funny thing where nobody actually tells you that it's going to be really, really hard. And part of that is also, I think, the more adventurous that you are and the more risks that you're taking, that is going to pile up psychologically and emotionally. And especially if you meet somebody where it does become serious and it's not fun and light anymore, there is a lot of maturing that's happening. And like just remembering that, like, that process of growing and feeling yourself becoming more mature and more sure, like that's not an easy process and it doesn't feel good. And so the advice that I would give to somebody is to kind of not stress about understanding yourself super, super deeply, because like that will come, but just like understanding if you are going to take a really crazy leap, like moving to a new country, either for somebody or just in general to experience that new country come what may, is like, are you somebody that is just genuinely open to the universe and you know that you'll kind of be happy no matter how you land? Or are you a little bit more of an anxious personality, like I am, where you're going to be stressed a little bit more in the day-to-day, and like, thoughts will pile up in your head into like, how is it going to go? What will the future look like? And just kind of like knowing which of those two camps, more or less, you fall into, I think sets you up to remember that other point that I made of just being kind with yourself however you are. Because if you're really easygoing and you're free-spirited, that's going to come with its own challenges. And then, of course, also if you're more anxious and stressed and inclined to think about the future and kind of struggle to live in the present, you're going to have different struggles too.
How did it go for you back then?
At first, it was really fun. I had Spanish, like I spoke Spanish before I moved to France. And a lot of people are quite surprised when I say like, oh, it was never like the dream to move to France, because I know it's quite a romantic notion, especially for people who have studied the language and things like that. Like I mentioned, I had just happened to meet the French man who is now my husband, but at the time, he just happened to be French, happened to be in France. And so I chose Paris because it was a place where I could be closer to him without putting a lot of pressure on what I thought might become a relationship. And, like I was right, it did. But in so moving to Paris, I think it was really difficult to realize, like knowing a similar Romance language to French did not necessarily mean that I picked up on the cultural differences very quickly. And like Spanish as a language, like obviously it's spoken by many, many different countries, but there is a very big distinction between even just Spanish speakers and French speakers in my experience. And speaking of like France French speakers, I don't know very many Canadian French speakers, so can't say. But just the way French culture can feel very closed if you don't have the language. And even when you're trying to practice your language skills and trying to get better, it can feel like an uphill challenge in a way that it's not in Spanish, because Spanish speakers generally tend to be quite receptive to efforts to speak in Spanish, and they're generally very friendly. These are all obviously generalizations, but in my experience, it was much easier to just kind of plunge into a Spanish-speaking environment and learn Spanish and get better at it and come out speaking quite well. Whereas France, it was much more difficult, I think in part because of the culture, but then also because, like I mentioned, I'm a little bit more anxious and future-oriented. So when I came here and Thibaut, my partner, was in the picture, I had a little bit more stress about trying to learn the language, because I was like, there's a little bit more at stake here. And so that obviously, anybody that's trying to learn a new language knows, like going in stress is just not going to improve it or help your speaking or help you learn it faster. So the language was a huge thing, I think, in the first year or two when I was getting my bearings.
So despite the language, which other hurdles, challenges did you have to overcome during your last years in France?
I think going to the beginning of how you opened it, right? Like the language, and then the money thing crept up really quickly. Because when you go to au pair, and also when you move abroad when you're on the younger side, especially, like I just had some savings from all my random jobs. And I also was not doing any sort of like financial planning or budgeting beyond like, can I afford to do like this right now and maybe like take a trip in a few months or something like that. So the financial thing was really kind of took me by surprise, because after my year in Paris, Thibaut and I were doing really well like on our relationship. So it was decided that I would move to Strasbourg and we would move in together and, kind of take that next step. And my brain just like hadn't fully registered how difficult it would be to try to stay in France and try to find a job. So at that point, I was on a student visa, which was a blessing in disguise, because 2018 was actually the last year that you could come to France on either the student visa or the au pair visa. As of 2019, you have to come on the au pair visa, and then you are locked into that. So I was a little bit lucky in that sense, because when I moved to Strasbourg, I was like, okay, I'm just going to try to renew the student visa, stay in the au pair world. So when I moved to Strasbourg, it was with the intention to improve my French and then maybe find a job in French in France, which is obviously much easier said than done. And so I spent a good chunk of my savings on a course called Alliance Française here in Strasbourg, and they are a great institution. They have language centers like all over the world, and their teachers tend to be like very passionate. Their pedagogy and curriculum are really, really good. Obviously, there are exceptions, but the experience that I had here in Strasbourg was great. And so it did take my language from like an A2, which is like, kind of confidently saying hello, to about a B2, depending on the day, but about a B2 where I could, comfortably hold a conversation and that sort of thing. So, but it was quite expensive, and the course was only 3 months long. So it was for 20 hours a week for 3 months. And at that time, that allowed me to renew my student visa for an entire year. But again, there was just like this lack of forward thinking on my part and understanding like, okay, so even if you invest in learning the language, you invested in the relationship by moving here and are technically okay to stay in the country for at least one more year, like how do you go about building a life like for yourself, right? Like not just continuing to build on the relationship. And that's a distinction I think that I wasn't quite thinking about until I really moved to Strasbourg and moved in with my partner.
Do you think, like in the retro perspective, that you would have left France if it wouldn't have been for Thibaut back then, may I ask? Or is that something that never crossed your mind when you were struggling with building a career and really like root in the country or grow roots in the country you're living in?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because I was very much actually not trying per se, but very open to leaving France because especially in the very beginning, like Thibaut and my relationship, like we understood that we were serious to each other compared to American men. French men, or at least my French man, does not talk as in depth about like defining the relationship and thinking about next steps and like really kind of digging into those details. And so that made me feel really insecure kind of about the relationship, but at more of like an existential level, because I was like, okay, like his actions and what he says, like they line up, you know, he is telling me he is serious. He's acting like he is serious. But there are these things that culturally, as we're trying to date, are really giving me these insecurities just because I'm used to them. You know, like American men will proclaim that they love you. Everything is a big deal. There are milestones, all of these things. And so with Thibaut, I had to get used to the fact that like that wasn't the case for him. That wasn't how he was used to like moving forward in a relationship. And I was also, you know, the first long-term, very serious relationship that he had had. And so that was just an experience difference between us there. And so to your question, after the first year, or towards the end of that first year, when I was au pairing, like when I wasn't sure what was going on, I was like, well, I have to give myself options. So I was like applying to like a horse farm in Greece, an international school in Greece, a travel writing position in like Thailand. Like I was really just sending things out into the universe. But then ironically, that ended up being one of the signs for me that like it was actually in my cards if I wanted them to stay, because I was applying to all of these jobs that were like entry level, volunteer, very much fit my very limited resume at the time. And I was either getting ghosted, nobody was answering, they said no thank you. And so then when Thibaut and I were talking and it came up that, you know, he would actually be very happy if I wanted to move to Strasbourg to like be with him and do that, I was like, okay, like I didn't realize fully that that's where you saw this going, and that's why I did all of these things. But now that this is clear, yes, of course I would love to do this. And, you know, like I said, the universe, I feel like, was giving me a sign when it was like not letting me, to an extent, like go from France. But without Thibaut, I really couldn't say. I might have gone to a different part of France, or maybe I would have stayed in Paris for one more year to do something else. But I can't confidently say that I would have stayed like long term in France.
Obviously, that's a tricky question because you never know. Like the what if question, it's something that crosses your mind from day to day. Because sometimes you're wondering, how did I even end up here? Like, who knew? Eventually, you in France, me in Argentina, we just had this conversation talking about relationship. Also, again, part of the podcast episode will be finances as well. Yeah, it's just crazy if you think about all the options you had and the route you actually took, that this is what led you where you nowadays. Also, really respect for Thibaut that he took the initiative and invited you or asked you like, hey, would Strasbourg be an option for you to live together with me? Because I can only imagine like kind of not being 100% sure where all this is leading and feeling, okay, dating in France is just so different to the US, and not really knowing where are we at in our relationship. And then suddenly in the right moment, he comes along and he's just like, what about, what if? And so you just take this path. And again, it's just leading you where you're nowadays. So also what I'm curious about, you've been mentioning like struggles you've been overcoming, that you wanted to build your career, your professional career in France, that you really tried to, again, to grow your roots and to feel as comfortable as possible. But what I know from our little pre-session is that, and also from what you've just shared, that things didn't work out the way you had them planned. So I'm wondering what happened, because there's a little cut in between, and maybe you can give us a little, summary of how you felt and what actually happened back then.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I thought I knew and ended up being super wrong about in terms of like where am I going professionally, career-wise, like my guiding North Star and everything, like since finishing my bachelor was one day I'm going to go back and get my master in creative writing. And the reason that I did not do that directly out of my bachelor's was very intentional. Like the subject matter that I was writing about, like I did contemporary fiction and now I also write nonfiction essays, just kind of, on cultural things or personal things. And for me, I made the decision to wait and go out and just have experiences to kind of deepen my writing and like meet all sorts of different people and have conversations and experiences that challenge my way of thinking, that whole things. That was also kind of my like excuse, if you will, to like just kind of try and do all of these random things. And Thibaut was on board with that as an idea from the beginning, just sure, like tell me when you want to start applying. Like the process usually takes 1 year from when you start to prepare the application and then like you apply and then you hear back. So it was always technically in the cards. But before that application process happened, I moved to Strasbourg, did the language class, ran out of money, freaked out. There was the election happening in the US in 2020. And so I know when you say 2020, obviously everybody thinks of COVID, but my freak out actually happened a little bit before COVID. So I was involved in Democrats Abroad at the global level where you volunteer. And I was just so frustrated because I had finished this French class. I wasn't finding work. I didn't want to, just do random jobs anymore. I kind of wanted to really start advancing my career in some meaningful way. And so I kind of really grabbed onto politics and I decided to go back to the US and work as a field organizer for one of the Democratic candidates at that point. It was not decided that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party yet. So there was this massive field and so many people were trying to be the Democratic candidate. And so there was one in particular that I really liked. I really was passionate about her platform. And so I actually applied and then ended up getting the job to be what's called a field organizer, where you go door to door and you're knocking and speaking with people in different communities and just trying to say, oh, did you know there's an election coming? Oh, what are your thoughts on the state of politics right now? Have you heard of this candidate? Et cetera, et cetera. And that process of applying for that job moved much more quickly. So I applied in like mid-December, thinking, oh, maybe I will, hear back in January after the holidays and probably have to talk to Thibaut sometime soon about doing this because, maybe I'll get it and go at the end of January. And then I actually got like a job offer like 1 week from that initial application. And they were like, can you start Christmas Day? Because of course it's the US. And I was like, no, I can't, but let me talk about when I can go back. I had to have a really hard conversation with Thibaut because I had just applied in like a fit of frustration one day. So I had to both tell him I applied, I got it. This is not me breaking up with you. This is me just really panicked that I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I feel like I have no professional future here at the moment, and I frankly need money. And so I fully anticipate my candidate will not make it. Like, logically, I was like, I think she'll be out by early May or early March. And it went exactly as I said. I was like, my intention is to come back to you just a little bit more clear-headed, a little bit more confident, and with a little bit of money so that I have the time, and the luxury of time to like think a little bit more and to prepare more applications here. And so in December 2019, I went to Iowa in the US. And I started that job. And then I was effectively in the US, spent time in 3 different states over the next 3 months, doing that field organizing work. She dropped out just as I expected because while I loved her, there were, other candidates that the country loved more. And I had a flight booked back to Strasbourg at the end of March 2020. And so COVID, I think, hit the US March 17th or something like that. And so the next 2 months became just this insane like struggle to try and get back. But the big silver lining, I think, of like that moment in both history for me and Thibaut was like realizing I really wanted to come back because I loved my work. I was like, wow, like, I don't know why I didn't do this sooner. I don't know. I loved the work, and being involved in US politics just felt really meaningful for me and it lit me up. And then at the same time, I was like, but I have to go back to Thibaut. And it wasn't that sense of obligation. It wasn't a sense of like, no sense of obligation. It was just that like deep-seated sense of like, shit, like I found my person and it's so inconvenient, but I guess I'm going to go back. And so I did that. And then it was tough because I had 3 more months left in my student visa. And so I found some awful job, like trying to sell some service, like a random sales job essentially. And I almost got my visa sponsored, and then I didn't make my sales quota. And then I had 6 weeks left or something crazy. And so then we decided to do what's called a PAX in France, which is effectively a civil union. And it's basically like marriage light. It doesn't have the seriousness of a marriage for families or for the individuals, but it confers the same rights on an immigrant as a marriage does. So you can get what's called the vie privée familiale, the private family visa. And from March 2021, that is what I changed to. And then I started to do some freelance writing. I opened up a micro-entreprise, a very small business here, and kind of started to get my feet wet in the freelance writing world. And I can pause there because, as you said, we chatted a little bit, and that gets a little bit more into finding my financial footing. But it was very, very challenging in the beginning. If anybody is going through that right now, I don't really think that there's any way to prepare for it, especially when you're younger and you are just moving around at the whim of your emotions. So I do commend anybody that's trying to navigate that, because that is a very stressful time, and you're just going to have to kind of buckle down and get through it and, do the best that you can and say sorry when you lose your patience and get really frustrated with your partner, because they're going to experience a lot of that with you.
So there were some harder, more difficult conversations you had to address during that period of time. So I'm wondering, how did Thibaut and you as partners, obviously you've managed it, but how did you manage it? What did you do to make sure that you as a couple are always on the same page, especially the time where you went to the US and then coming back with an idea, but not a plan yet?
The US was actually weirdly the easier time, I think, because when you're long distance, like we were at that point, and you're truly with an ocean across, the main indicator of whether or not it's going to work is truly how you feel when it's time to talk to your person, because that's the only way you have to stay in touch with them, is to do the video calls. And at a certain point or certain times, there's a sense of obligation and you don't really want to do it. And it's not because you don't love them, but you're just oh, I'm so tired of doing the video call thing. But that sense of obligation never started to feel like it was taking over the love that I had for him. So, being able to separate, I'm just really tired of doing long distance, and I do truly love this person. And there was an end in sight, right? So it wasn't like this was going to happen for the foreseeable future. I was just oh, this is just kind of an unenjoyable part of our relationship right now. But at least it was clear, because we were both making the effort. I would work really long days, but still find with the time difference, just moments to we would do a quick call, or I would check in, or we would send pictures. So that was actually easier. But I think when you're back, it's for me at least, it was harder because you're together, and yet you still have all of these frustrations that you are very personally experiencing, and your partner is trying to sympathize with, but can't actually offer any meaningful help unless, their family happens to own a business, or, you're very fortunate and they're connected and can help you in some way. And so with Thibaut being a master's student, the only thing, quote unquote, obviously it's important, but the only thing he could offer was sympathy and encouragement and a lot of patience, I think, too. So in hindsight, something that I'm very grateful is I know that there were so many times I was just really impatient and frustrated with myself, and that came out in my tone and the way that I spoke to him. And he never that get to him personally. If I was ever out of line, he would say that was really harsh. He would correct me. It was never a point where it was verbal abuse or anything like that. But he would let me just kind of say my piece, and then he would process, and then he would just kind of let me know that he was on my team. And then that actually reminded me oh yeah, I'm not frustrated at you. I'm frustrated at the situation. And I think that was really important for me, because I just built so much trust that I could say what I really thought to him, and also learn how to kind of anticipate when something that I might say might come off as hurtful. even if that wasn't my intention, you know, I just needed to get something off my chest, I still learned to develop a little bit of like, oh, like he's being so patient and thoughtful, but like I do know that this might hurt his feelings. And so I learned to kind of like preface that before I said my piece. And like that, I learned to control a little bit more like how I was saying and what we were talking about. So I wasn't just like complaining and venting, because that's not very productive, like over and over. And then on his end, you know, he was very patient, but then, you know, learned that there has to be give and take. You know, like the partner can't just be the patient doormat that listens all the time. Like he or she has to be encouraging you to like find solutions, to grow, to like, you know, make those independent decisions about what your life is going to look like. Because like, even if you're together, and I'll say this over and over, even if you're together with somebody, you still are leading independent lives, and yours deserves to be meaningful to you.
That's actually also an interesting topic, because what I've experienced, like my experience in many ways is very similar to yours. I did come to Miami. I moved to Miami with just a little bit of money, like not so much back then. I mean, I'm an open book when it comes to this. But back then I moved to Miami with only $7,000, and at least half of it I spent for papers, you know, permits and stuff like this. And then in the end, I've realized that even though I thought back then for me that was a lot of money, I'm bringing a lot of money into the country, it was just peanuts, you know. And then I fell into, and again, also something I'm quite open-minded, and I'm nowadays I can talk about it, but back then I'm not sure if I would have been able to address it so openly. But then I was just like in this constant cycle of questioning myself, my decisions, the partnership. And I was lucky that Nacho understood what I was going through, and what you are just describing is the exact same thing that happened to us. That Nacho was just like, hey, I'm not your emotional doormat. Like, we can talk about that like grown-up adults. I know you're going through a lot, but you crossed the line here, and get your shit together and we keep on talking, you know. But right now, the way you act, I know that's not you. I know that's like a lot of frustration. I know that's a lot of fear, but make sure to get your thoughts in order, and then we can talk about it. And he had to say it this way for me to understand, okay, he's right. I need to sort things out. I can come back. I will address it. We will work through it together, and eventually we will find a solution that works for the both of us. But what I did for a long time as well, this is why I'm very grateful that we're having this conversation right now, and that I'm not the only one who experienced this. I kind of felt oftentimes that I'm depending on him on everything, on the language, you know, on paperwork, on the culture, which is in Miami, honestly, very similar to the Latin culture. It's not very much the American culture there. But yeah, there were just so many things I had to figure out. And oftentimes I felt like, if anything, Nacho is there and he will navigate things for me. And that got to a point where I felt like, okay, I'm losing my independency. Like, we're not in this equal team anymore where both parts are playing an important role. I felt like his part is playing a much more important role because I'm depending on him. So we're not on eye level anymore. And one phrase which I love to share as well, which Nacho shared with me, that stick to my brain, and from there was just a switch in my head that was just turned, is like, listen, Tina, I know, again, you're going through a lot of emotions. I know you're trying to figure it out. I know you really want to make this work, but right now I don't feel like we're walking next to each other. I feel like I'm walking way ahead of you, but don't worry, I'm going to wait for you. Eventually you will catch up, and then we will walk together, you know? I will wait for you, but I will not wait forever. So eventually you have to figure out how to move on and how to move into my direction. And I don't know, for me, again, it was just like from one day to the other. I woke up the next morning, was just like in a movie. I was just like, yep, I think I have my shit together now. And then, you know, suddenly things just work out my way. And I was really, really working hard on myself in order to gain this independency back again, in order to feel like I'm in control. from what you're sharing right now, it feels like there were some situations where you felt as well like you lost control. So I'm wondering, how did you gain it back? I understand you had this very open conversations with Thibaut. You realized that he's in your team, you're playing together, you're not playing against each other. But eventually there was a turning point for you as well. What was this turning point for you?
I think the turning point was actually very similar to what you're describing with you and Nacho, where like just learning to communicate effectively. Right? I think there's a way to communicate in a couple, and sometimes you can be communicating in a way that's technically good, technically healthy, but it's not actually the right way to be communicating for your couple, and also not necessarily the right way for that moment. So I think one of the key things in answer to your question was like learning what I needed from Thibaut in our exchanges. Like I'm very solution oriented, analytical, go-getter. So it wasn't that I, couldn't get out of bed and had a situation where I wasn't feeling motivated. I was just feeling really frustrated and feeling like all of my energy was just like, bleh, like I was just throwing paint at the wall all the time. And a recurring theme that, going back to what I said with Thibaut before, where like things were different even when we first started dating, where I didn't personally feel like I had the level of reassurance that I wanted. That actually became a really meaningful way for him to listen to me later on at that point in our relationship, where he, I guess to like reference like the love languages, right? There's like acts of service and words of affirmation and all of those. I sort of learned about myself and he learned about me that like acts of service is like my number one thing. So it's not necessarily that I need somebody to build me up and tell me how wonderful I am. It's that I need somebody to walk into the room and be able to tell based on how I'm hunched over at my computer and if I'm like all tense and stressed, to like be able to just know she's probably been online applying to jobs and looking at companies, and it's 7:30 at night, and so she probably hasn't eaten since lunch, if not breakfast. And so he would just go and make dinner, for example. And like that, to me personally, is more meaningful than like pretty much anything else he could do, because like at that point, I don't want him to come over and touch me on the shoulder and be like, how was your day? Like, what do you think my day was like? And so that kind of love from him, where he could just come in and see me and like truly see me, like, and where you feel seen based on what he does, that I think really ended up being an anchor for me, how I trusted more deeply that this was my person. And so that what I was working for myself, even if I didn't know that it would lead to being self-employed and marketing and these things, just having faith that it would work out. And I think early on, especially when you're doing something that you didn't expect to be doing, so in my case, that was freelancing, saying yes to everything in the beginning is really important, because you learn what you don't like very quickly and what you can tolerate, what you're willing to tolerate. Like you're getting all of this information about yourself through work. And I think especially when you're in a situation like you're living abroad or you're in an unexpected situation, that information is actually really valuable, and you learn, I would say, more about yourself than the average person. Like, so somebody who didn't do what we did, where we find ourselves trying to like chart this path as young adults, but in a foreign country and in an environment where we don't feel very supported.
But as you've mentioned, all the experience you've made, the hustle, your journey brought you to what you're doing nowadays, which is, as you've mentioned as well, being a freelancer. So having your own company or running your own company in that sense. And I'm wondering, because I've been teasing it a couple of times throughout our conversation. So I'm wondering, let's talk about money. So how was the whole process of going from au pair, living in France, earning any money, to like having a financial, and Germany would say a financial cushion,
Sure.
being able to support yourself and being able to be independent? Because what I've learned as well, and I had to learn the hard way, but part of being independent is also having a financial cushion and earning money for yourself. And that's actually that has to do with the way I grew up as well, but that's another story for another time. So we can definitely do a deep dive on this as well. My relationship with money is not the best. Essential. It is important in order to build your life, to be independent, to feel in control, and not only to, live the life you wish for, but also to have this ease, this easy mind. I think that's the phrase in English. Correct me if I'm wrong. And to really build a future for yourself as well as someone, again, who is independent. So with this being said, I'm wondering, how was your process when it comes to this?
I have such a distinct memory. When I was an au pair in Paris, I met a Canadian woman who is still an amazing friend to this day, and she was self-employed. And we met through a creative writers group that I was part of, and we were standing in the metro together, and she was talking about, all of the different projects that she works on as a freelancer. And she was telling me, and like, unless you become a teacher or something like that, you'll probably be self-employed. So like, let me know if you ever need any tips or like help setting up your own business. I was like, in my head, I was like, that sounds awful. You have to be so organized. There's so much paperwork involved. Like I would be intimidated to like start a business in the US in my language, let alone in France. I was just kind of like, oh, haha, like, thank you so much. Like, and then in my head, like, never doing that. That sounds so hard and so like not fun. But then, as I said, it kind of just became an option after we did our PAC. So after we did our civil union, which is ironic because at that time, technically, I said the visa that I had gives you the rights to apply for any job, and you're not asking for somebody to sponsor you anymore. You're asking for somebody to simply hire you. So it becomes, in theory, a little bit easier to have a traditional job. But after we did the civil union, I started to have one or two opportunities. Just they're meeting other Americans that were in the area who I had met through my like French language class. There's another American, and you just meet people. And so in my case, I met them and they had seen my Instagram captions and they were like, well, you really seem like you enjoy writing and, you're really good at it. And I was like, thank you. I do enjoy writing. And they were like, do you freelance? And I was like, do I freelance? Like, is that paid? And they were like, yeah, like I have. So one of them had a social media project that she wanted help with. And another one had like editing work on presentations that were going out to clients. So just like these little projects started coming along and I had no idea how to like price them. Like to your point of like financial independence, I was just like, oh my God, in survival mode, like I'm about to get money. And before starting to freelance, it was like I was doing Cambly, which is this English tutor thing online where you make like $7 an hour or something, and like awful, wonderful children, but just awful financial experience. And so when the freelance thing kind of opened up and became a thing, I was like, oh, and then, trying to Google. So I would be like, $25 an hour or like 10 cents a word or something, like you're just throwing out numbers. And then I got very lucky that one of them was looking for something more long-term and she was looking for an established company for me to come in under her at like a consultant level, which, sidebar, if you don't know the difference between a freelancer and a consultant, you should absolutely understand it before you agree to go on as a consultant because the expectations are so different. And I did not have the experience. I did not fully understand what was going to be expected of me or the pressure or like how wildly underprepared and frankly, like just green and junior I was. And so there were some really important things that happened in that role where the base pay, I think, was I was getting 35 or 40 euro an hour, which is incredible when you are just in your first 1 or 2 years of freelancing, at least back then. I think now I would say that's maybe more of a baseline just in this time and day. Ideally you want to be separate conversation, as you say. So anyways, in 2020, I was making 35 or 40 euros an hour for this company, and it was coming out to a project of around 2,000 a month, which is great. And so the experience of being a consultant before I was ready and having that title and working in a company where it was just like thrown to the wolves, it was a really terrible experience emotionally and personally, but I learned a ton about those differences that I was talking about all of the things that I didn't know. And in the same way that like knowing what you don't like is really important, it also is really important to understand there are so many things you don't know and you're just always going to be in learning mode. And if you're lucky, you'll have somebody to teach you in a nice way. And then many times you will not, you will learn it the hard way. So there's a lot of professional growth happening. And then separately, I realized, oh, like consultants seems to carry more like financial meaning when you say you're a consultant, when you're billing as a consultant. And so that kind of helped me understand that you could freelance, but in a way that was more professional and be viewed more favorably, and in a way that could actually lead to like long-term financial stability. So yeah, like I said, the first year and a half was just super rough. Like people would give me projects, I was working with them, I would do absolute shit, I would learn really quickly, and it was just like a really mixed bag in terms of the quality of work. Because again, at that point, what am I, 25, and trying to be professional for the first time in my life. I've been an au pair, I've helped people pick out their wedding dresses, and I can write really well. Best intentions, just absolutely going to shit. But then I needed to do my taxes after the first year of having my small business here in France, because when you are a US citizen, as you know, or a green card holder, or in any way attached to the US system, you are obligated to file an annual tax return in most cases. And so I was trying to learn how to do that, because it is more complicated when you have a small business structure. And in my case, I have a proper French ami compte prise. And so I was attending all of these webinars, trying to figure out, like hosted by US expat tax firms, trying to understand how to do this. And I attended them all year, missed all of the deadlines. I was too scared to try and file. And then at the end, like literally, I think in November, I finally went to the website of one of the firms that I had really liked their presentation. And I was like, I don't care. I'll spend the money, because it is very expensive in most cases to have a firm do it for you. I'll spend the money to make sure that it's done well. And I really liked this firm. Like their online presence looked really like nice. Like their branding really spoke to me. So when I was on their website, I was just kind of poking around as you do. And it just ended up being this really serendipitous thing where they were hiring for a marketing manager that somehow described all of the random content writing, social media management, like reviewing the published blog articles and optimizing it for SEO, which I had started to learn, like just all the random stuff that I thought was just random crap that I had done and often felt really bad about, like leading up to that point. Because again, it doesn't feel good when you're learning. It doesn't feel good. You feel stupid. It's normal. You are learning.
But speaking out of my experience, I mean, there's always much more you can learn, but at some point you have to acknowledge that what you know is valuable as well, and that you can actually bill for what you know. So I had to learn that the hard way as well, because I'm a freelancer as well. And then in the beginning, you're just like 25, in my case, 25 euros an hour. That's so much money. That's crazy. They would actually, and then you realize, but I have to pay taxes. I have to pay my own insurance. It's actually not that much. Like, what was I thinking? So it's a whole process.
Yes. And then later you learn that it's actually cheaper for companies, especially in Europe, right? If they don't have to hire you full time, like the difference between what it costs to hire somebody full time and what it makes sense to pay a contractor, like to the individual person's brain feels ridiculous. But to them as a company that's worth, hundreds of thousands or millions of euros, like again, separate conversation. But yeah, you do learn these funny things that are just like, oh, wow, how I think about money is very different when I'm thinking about myself and what I am earning, when you are your company and you're responsible for, like you said, declaring and paying taxes on all of your stuff, because there's no boss to be handling all that for you. So I found this position that perfectly described everything that I had done, applied for it, and I got it. And that position ended up helping me find my niche in being a marketing consultant. Finally, I can say it confidently, a marketing consultant for US expat tax and financial firms, specifically in Western Europe. So I have two main clients right now, and one is based in Spain and he's from Miami. The other one is based in Florence and he's from Alaska or Seattle, depending on when you ask him. So it's just very aligned with who I am, which is a small business owner and an American living in France, right? I need to do my taxes. I need to be thinking about long-term financial planning as an immigrant in a foreign country. And I do have very strong feelings about like the importance of making sure that you're doing these things right. Just because like one of the many things you don't think about when you're moving abroad when you're younger is like, is it going to look like to financially provide for the lifestyle that you want to have in 5 or 10 years? Like nobody's thinking about that. And that's fine and normal. But like if your goal is to one day own a home, if your goal is to be able to visit your family regularly or be able to go back for milestones or surprise events or even sad events, right? Like that all costs money. And some people are fortunate to be able to rely on family for that. And I think that's a wonderful gift. Probably a separate conversation is the weird ways in which expats socialize with one another, where you're trying to acknowledge your financial privilege in some situations, but then also signal that you're not financially privileged in others. So cutting through that, I think it's great if you can rely on your family. But again, if at the end of the day, the goal is to be financially independent, I think for people that are living in foreign countries, unless you are in a country that is far, far, far less expensive or the exchange rate between the currencies is wildly in your favor, I think it's much more difficult. And even then, right, like Germany to Argentina, you would think like, oh, like that's a favorable exchange. Like on paper, that would look like a really quote unquote easy jump. But if you go when you're young, everything is harder in ways that don't negate that it's also hard to move abroad when you're older and more established in your career. But thinking about the money component sooner rather than later, I think is especially important when you're just kind of making these jumps blind and for love and spontaneously when you're younger.
It definitely gives you some ease knowing that you do have this financial cushion I was just mentioning. Because again, in my case, I didn't have it, you didn't have it, and it just makes things more difficult the moment you realize I have to think about money. I have to think about ways to earn money in order to support myself. And especially giving that I don't want to rely on someone else. And it's great what you've just mentioned, that if you have someone you can rely on, that's the one part. But in my opinion, and that's also the way I was raised, when it comes to being independent, that also includes being financial independent, and you have to start somewhere. And I just love your journey that you went from being an au pair in France to having your own business nowadays, making enough income to support you, to support each other, and also to support your future vision, which brings me to my next question, because we know that you do have some plans ahead of you. So that's definitely not the end of where you're at professionally, but also within your relationship. So I'm wondering what's next for you when it comes to your profession, but also to your private life. What are your next steps?
Big questions. So professionally, like I said, I have 2 main clients. Like I think of them as my anchors, both financially and then in terms of the priority that I give them in terms of my time and attention. And they're both younger, newer firms in the space. And I am so passionate and excited about the work that they do. It will be interesting to see. Right now, my roles with them are fractional. So it's not a full-time thing, but the value that I bring at this stage allows me to work effectively full-time, but for 2 different companies, and then get paid what is effectively, I think, around 6,000 before taxes here in France, which is an incredible salary for anybody that's living in France. I think the median is around or like low 30s or something like that. So in thinking about like professional trajectory and just like you said, I don't think very often about where I've come from because they almost feel like disparate worlds, you know, like coming as an au pair with some savings and then learning from scratch how to do everything, both the skill set, but then also how to talk about what I'm worth and how to be able to demonstrate that to clients. All of those different things, I think, just make me really excited to be working with firms that like kind of capture that energy that I have And so it almost feels like I don't want to say explicitly because they're going to grow and they're going to keep doing better. And when firms do that, whether you're self-employed or an employee, that means that you can earn more. But I will just say that I feel really optimistic and really comfortable for the first time, not like right in this moment, but like probably in the last like 6 months to a year, I've started to feel just really comfortable and really confident in the direction that things are going, and believing that, like, again, going back to what I was saying, just not really knowing where it was going, but pushing forward and like having faith that all of the decisions that I was making were going to lead to something. Like, it does feel like I've come to something meaningful, and it like isn't, my passion. Like, it like all of this was kind of a happy accident at the end. And so learning that you don't have to be fully aligned in your passion to like earn an income and be able to plan and feel financially secure, I think that feels like just a really big gift at this stage. And then personally, we are at the moment trying to understand if we're going to stay in Strasbourg long term or potentially try another country. Spain is at the top of our list, so I guess that's just like a stay tuned. I truly don't know at this stage, but it's Thibaut for his work. I can work remotely anywhere in Europe. So yeah, we will just see how some job applications go, both here and outside of France. And personally, we will just potentially be embarking on a new adventure, whether it looks like saying definitively, okay, we're staying in Strasbourg, because, I arrived here before COVID and it's been a while, but every year, every 2 years has felt very different, or trying a new country together, which would be awesome and very cool for very different reasons.
I have another big question for you, which will not be too easy to answer. But first, before stepping into this, I feel like I'm just opening a completely new topic here, more or less. Thanks for being so open-minded, for sharing your vision, your story, your love story, but also your career path. And even though you feel like those were just funny accidents, I don't feel that way, because in my opinion, and knowing what I know about you, it does feel like you're working very hard on your goals. Or I'm pretty sure that you're working very hard on your goals, and that you have the capability of taking chances when you see them. So you take opportunities instead of shying away from them. And I'm pretty sure that this brought you to where you are at nowadays when it comes to your profession. And I understand that there's still a lot of growth, but yeah, applauding here for building your life financially as well, and for having a solid income, as someone who's not from France, who's from abroad, from the US, coming as an au pair and having a successful business that has a lot of potential to grow as well. So again, I don't feel like everything that happened, you would like to call it funny accidents, but you also have to have, the cojones. You have to be brave enough to just take the opportunity as well. I know you're going to understand. So instead of just being, okay, but I'm just a freelancer, I'm not a consultant, to take the opportunity to be a consultant, for example. I mean, as I understand, you didn't really have an idea of what that would mean, but you took the opportunity, you went for it. It wasn't the best experience, but how you phrase it nowadays is that was the learning, and now you know what you don't want. So definitely also when you saw the job description and you just applied for it, while your main goal was to file taxes, and that this brought you to where you're nowadays. Yeah, it's easy to call it funny accidents, but from what you're describing, it is not. It is hard work, and it's a solid foundation you've built over the last few years, and now it's paying off. I think I just want to emphasize that out of my experience as well, I mean, I'm still struggling. There's just so many questions I have when it comes to my profession, for example. But I know that after all, I have a goal in mind. I work hard on it. And if one door opens, I take the opportunity as well, because this is what worked out for me in the past. And not everything I started in the past worked out eventually, but I gained the skills and the mindset in order to keep on moving forward and trying out something new. And everything I've learned before was very useful. For example, what I'm doing now. So you never know. But again, just want to emphasize, that I see that you've been working very hard on what you're doing or to get where you are nowadays. To get to my big question, I understand that, and I feel like this is especially a topic women are dealing with when it comes to their mindset, like to the question, what am I worth? Like, how much can I charge, for example? Am I good enough? Also, am I good enough? And like when it comes to the work they're doing, especially as a freelancer, that can get quite tricky because you have to put a number. So if you are billing hourly or you're billing monthly, but there's a number. And also out of my experience, oftentimes it's like, okay, I'm doing some extra. The client is not paying me for this, but I feel like I owe that to the client. But correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm observing is that you moved past that point. So I'm wondering, how did you switch your mindset when it comes to, that's my price and this is what I'm asking for and I'm worth every penny. So what happened in your situation to get where you are nowadays?
That's a huge, huge question, but I'm actually really grateful that it came up because, like you said, this is a big one. It's out of left field, but I think about it all the time. I talk about it with a good friend of mine who just became a social media specialist recently. So she's fresh on her freelancer journey as of like January this year. And I think it comes down to that word that you used, mindset, with the asterisk. So I would say that when you're starting out, if you're starting out as I did, where it's kind of just a survival thing, it's unexpected, you truly don't have a skill set beyond I'm going to work hard and figure it out. At that point, it doesn't really make sense to me to focus on what you're making as long as you're making a living wage that you can survive. And even in that case, you sometimes have to make exceptions because at the end of the day, you do just need to take projects when you're starting out. So again, with the asterisk, if you truly don't have experience and you're just starting, you will start with hourly billing, which is, what you refer to, where you set a price for per hour and you agree to do a project. And usually it's for a set amount of hours. So for example, if you say 15 euros an hour to do some social media work, and they say, oh, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And you say, okay, that'll probably take me, 10 hours. Then you would bill for 150 euros for easy math. Where that gets tricky, as you have said, but just to kind of connect the dots, is when you bill by hourly, you need to really understand what goes into the work that you're doing. And so when you're starting out, that can be really tricky because you don't fully know. And I think especially as women, we want to be really grateful and not seem like we're taking advantage or not seem that we're being pushy. And so we tend to lowball. So if we're like in our heads, oh, I don't know, it could be 15 to 20 euros an hour. I'm just going to say 15 to make sure that I get it. And then on top of that, if somebody is asking you to scope how much time it's going to take, and to use my social media example, you might think, oh, 10, maybe 15, I'll say 10 to be safe. So right there, there's like two key ways in which we're undermining our own earning potential and also setting a really dangerous precedent with that client. Because what I've learned and what I tell people at this stage is when you're going into a client relationship, they are not your friend. They are your client first. And it can be really challenging, especially in my experience with female clients, because there's, especially right now, a really big, build each other up, I'm so grateful for you, professional working relationship that can really blur into feeling like you're a friend. And I do believe you can be friends with clients, but it is so important to lay a groundwork that is rooted in professionalism before the friend things. And so again, to go back to that social media example, where it becomes dangerous is if you have somebody that can afford to pay you more, first of all, and you don't know that because you have just quoted them on the lower end of things. Let them be the ones to tell you that's too expensive. And I'm not saying, you're a beginner, come out here and quote 70 euros an hour. I'm saying if you're between 15 and 20, go for 20. And then the negotiation becomes, is it 15 or 18? And those are really important conversations for you to have, especially now that we have ChatGPT, because you can do so much research to understand, you just tell ChatGPT or you contact a friend with a little bit more freelance experience and you say, this is what I want. What does the professional conversation look like on my end so that I go into this project feeling good? And more often than not, how you articulate it is actually how it goes. So if you want 20 euros an hour and the person comes back to you and says, oh, like, will you accept 15? That also becomes a personal question for you, because to your point, I took it to a place where I got really into the earning potential of it. Like I do derive a lot of personal validation from how much money I make for myself, being extremely financially independent, being able to invest and do things that are not strictly necessary for me to live like a financially comfortable and like stable life in France. So I think all of this advice is kind of couched in the facts that when you're starting out, you're going to be learning a lot about your own personal relationship with money. And again, as a woman, you're probably going to be learning that you have a lot of things to work through in terms of your relationship to money. But I don't necessarily think that everybody needs to approach it from like, I need to get the most out of this as possible. And I'll reference my friend who just became a social media specialist as an example, because she is in a similar situation where it just makes more financial sense for her to do social media specialist work because it's in English and she's good at the creative stuff and she's got a kid, so it's more flexible. But she never set out to be a business owner like me. But unlike me, she doesn't really get a kick out of, like, she doesn't get a good high off of like all the things that go into it. So for her, the question is, how can I do work that I enjoy, that brings in an income that supports me and my, my husband and my daughter? She and her husband are both working, but it's important that they contribute to the household together. And that's kind of where it stops. Like, how can I earn enough income where I feel good, I can enjoy my family life? It's a little bit more, almost more French, right? Like much more American perspective to my work. But again, going back to those early conversations, that's where you start to understand, like, you yourself personally in these conversations with clients who are going to challenge, either like challenge, or just kind of push back on like, well, why do you think you're worth that? Or like, is this negotiable? And that involves doing a lot of work internally to be able to understand like how you want to push that conversation forward. So that's like the beginning stage. And then like to move away from hourly billing, I think that's the goal. Because the longer you stay in hourly billing, the easier it is for them to like kind of nickel and dime you, as we say in English, which is where, they're just like starting to count every single hour. They get really like in the details. And it's like, it's not about that at the end of the day. Like, even if you're a social media specialist who starts out billing by the hour, that is actually like consultant hat on, right? That is contributing to your brand presence. That is top of the funnel activity. That is bringing people to your landing page. That is then making them email subscribers. That is then making them potentially qualified leads or buying your service or product or whatever. And that's also something that you don't know starting off, but like, you're driving value for a company. And the more you do your work, the better you get at your work, and the better you get at articulating why your work matters to their bottom line. That's when you can start to move into value-based pricing, because you're thinking more like an ally to their business and less like an employee. When you bill by the hour, I think you're thinking more like an employee. Like, this person is providing for me and I should just be grateful for it. When you're billing like a consultant, you're thinking, I'm an expert, I'm driving value, they're fortunate to have me and I'm fortunate to have them. It's much more on a level playing field.
Yeah, much more on eye level. Thank you so much. That was just perfect. I feel like that summarized what we as women go through when asking ourselves the question, how much am I going to bill? And is it actually worth it? Is my work worth it? To really consider your contribution as a valuable contribution for a company you're working for, but also to keep an eye on, or to make sure that you're working on eye level. Because once, and this is the experience I've learned the hard way as well, I've made, that once a client feels like, okay, they can push you around and you don't set any boundaries. I mean, it's like in any other relationship as well. And it's the same when you just like have a normal and in quotes normal job. But once they start pushing you around and you're not showing where your boundaries are, you're not making your boundaries free, from that point, it's basically just downhill. And there will be at least one person, and that's you, that's going to suffer from it. And that will start going through the spiral, asking themselves the question, am I worth it? My work just sucks. And then you just, again, it's just like going backwards, where you feel like, okay, I kind of have to start from scratch, and the work is not good enough, or I am asking for too much, or I'm not worth it, or, there's just like so much to take into consideration when it comes to setting a price tag. But yeah, that's a conversation for another time as well. I think I have an episode on this as well. I have to check it out. I will link it here as well when it comes to this topic especially. But yeah, thank you so much for spending a little bit more than 1 hour with me, for sharing your love story, but also for sharing your professional story, like your growth over the past few years and how you got from A to where you're nowadays. I really appreciate your time. For everyone who's watching and or listening right now, what is the best way to get in contact with you in case they have any follow-up questions or they want to learn more about you?
Best way is on Instagram. So I'm the Millennial Abroad. I'm in the process of creating a proper brand, and I'll eventually have a website for my work, but I actually don't have any of that to date, which, unsolicited tip, you have not asked for it, but I would not recommend going as long as I have, which is 4 years at this point without a website. I've just been really fortunate that a lot of my work has been on referrals and word of mouth. But it is something that I feel I'm behind on. So if you are thinking about making a website, you don't need to spend a ton of money, but I would recommend probably doing it within the first year or two of your work. Not at the beginning if you're just figuring it out, but once you have a sense of what services you offer and that sort of thing, it does add just a huge level of huge professional element or portfolio or something like that. So like I said, unsolicited tip, but if you want to connect or DM me or anything like that, the Millennial Abroad on Instagram. I have a newsletter that I publish very infrequently that you can sign up for on themillennialabroad.com. And those are probably the two best places at this time.
Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening. Sending greetings to France. And yeah, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Tina. This was so fun.
Nada. Thank you so much for listening and or for watching to today's podcast episode. If you like what I'm doing, don't forget to rate the podcast with 5 stars wherever you're listening to it. In case you're watching on YouTube, subscribe for more, because I will be on a little related summer break, and the next podcast episode will be published on the 15th of October. But what I will do is I will share a few snippets of previous episodes on YouTube. So make sure to head over to YouTube if you're listening on Spotify or anywhere else, to subscribe there, to follow me there as well. And obviously I'll still be active on social media, so on Instagram, but also on TikTok, if this is what you're interested in, if you would like to follow up on what I'm up to, because there are some exciting new things in the pipeline. Yeah, as always, make sure to check out the links below. I will still be active in the WhatsApp group for women who are dating someone from a different country, and that's also one reason why I need a little break, because we are working on workshops in the background. So I got together with a few experts in different fields, and we are preparing to host workshops in most likely October, November, and December, early December. So if this is your cup of tea, check that out as well. I know it's a lot of links. Usually I don't do this, but again, I will be on a little break. I just want to make sure that whatever it is you need, that you will not miss out. And as always, we'll find everything in the side note as well as in the description of the podcast episode. With this being said, please take care. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're watching from, wherever you're listening to, and see you next time, middle of October. Again, make sure to follow me. Bye!